This morning we're going to look at some Baptist history and look at a young lady who really became a missionary hero in her mission endeavors. And this morning we'll look at the Scottish missionary, or English missionary, Lydia Mary Dehailes, spelled Dehailes, Lydia Dehailes. And she actually becomes the first single lady missionary to be appointed by the Baptist Missionary Society of Great Britain. Just a little bit about her. She was born into a Christian home in, as I said, London. Her name was very important to her father. He named her after Lydia in the New Testament, of whom he read, whose heart the Lord opened. And she, in her youth, was introduced very early to to the cause of missions and some preaching. On one occasion, she was very impressed by the Lord after she heard the great pioneer missionary to Africa, Robert Moffat, preach. And she very early in her life sensed that God was calling her to a life of missionary service. When she finished school, Lily, as she became known, she came down with a severe case of smallpox. For weeks, she was very sick, almost died. And the Lord healed her, though, and however, the disease left her permanently scarred, as that disease does. But that would not deter her from continuing to pursue her life as a missionary. That call was even intensified more as she read missionary biographies. She became friends with a man who his name was Grattan Guinness. Little did she know how important that friendship would be later in her life, but he was the chairman of Livingston Inland Mission there in England. When she returned to health, she decided that the Lord maybe would use her, she'd intensify her life of service by studying medicine. So she studied to be a nurse at a hospital there in London. Her parents had recently joined a church, the Baptist Chapel in Highgate, London, where Pastor James Stevens was the minister. And Pastor Stevens and that church is a very interesting study that we won't look at today, but Pastor Stevens' church, during his ministry, he witnessed 51 of his members volunteer for the mission field in his service there. Just tremendous mission church there in London. Later, she moved to Scotland, where she studied in Edinburgh, and it was there that she met another missionary appointee named Alexander Cowe, C-O-W-E, and he also had just recently been called to the Lord to be a missionary, and he had been appointed to serve the Lord in Congo, in Africa. In 1885, they were engaged, and the understanding was that Reverend Cowe would go to the mission field for a year, and then she would follow him a year later after they were married. Tragedy struck, however, and Alexander Cowe fell sick and died just after 5 weeks on the field there in Congo. Of course, this was devastating to her emotionally, and also devastating to her that she was not allowed at that time by the mission boards to go to Africa by herself as a single lady, and she was just crushed by all that had happened to her. She was very discouraged. She returned home, but God was not through. And as I said, I remember the name Grattan Guinness, the man that she had become friends with, who was the chairman of a mission board in England. He, about that time, was looking for a couple of single ladies to go with he and his wife and another married couple to the Congo. And he felt that she would be a perfect fit, as the Lord had called her, and of course with her medicine background. And they left for the Congo, the 6 of them, and she began her 40-year-long service for the Lord there in Africa. It's a long story, very wonderful story as you read about her service there. Her tireless serving of the Lord there, multiplied by the numerous problems that came, not just being in Africa, but also being a single woman in Africa. Are just remarkable, her stories, and her spiritual labors among the girls and women of that country are really amazing to read. fever swept through the Congo in the early 1900s. And at one point, she was the only doctor there. She wasn't even a doctor, but she was the only doctor in that area. And just get an idea of how what she faced here. In 1901, she treated 19,000 patients of various diseases just in that year alone. 1902, she would treat 25,200 patients. Just imagine that. And there were points in her story where she's bringing the sick and dying into her own home so she can minister to them. She gave every one of them. She would work tirelessly during the day to their giving attention to their physical needs, and then spend as much time as she could witnessing to them and trying to lead each one to the Lord, because life expectancy was so short and the disease was so terrible in that country at that time. In the course of time, a medical doctor arrived on the scene with his staff, and she was able to kind of be relieved of that responsibility and get back to her first love, and that was full attention to the spiritual ministry among the national girls and women there. She traveled by donkey. She became an itinerant worker among the girls and the women of the Congo. She visited many churches and worked among many churches there as they needed help along the country roads there. As time progressed, she became more and more frail and less mindful of her own health. The Lord provided a young man, Mapeti, to assist her, and he devoted his young life in those early years to really taking care of her. He insisted that she eat and rest, and really probably her life was extended because of his care. Mapeti eventually became the pastor of National Baptist Church in Leopoldville, there in the Congo. Just a wonderful story of how he helped her and traveled and helped her through her bad health. And what I haven't told you is concerning her health. All of her life, and especially on the field, she suffered from severe headaches, migraines daily, and then also almost crippling arthritis. And in the middle of all that, she is still seeing all those people and serving the Lord. Just a very fascinating story about her life. The headaches grew in severity and frequency. When she had served 40 years, she was already 6 years past the normal age of retirement for that mission society. They attempted to get her back. They really had been pushing her for those 6 years to come home because of her health, and they wanted to get her off the field. She knew, however, that if she did relent and go home, that she would never be allowed to come back. So she fought that for 6 years, but finally decided in 1930 that she would retire from the field and come home. It's not just we that study her, that know about her heroic exploits. Actually, the government of Belgium honored her with the distinction of the Chevalier of the Order of Leopold II, which is the highest civilian honor that Belgium can give for her work there in the Congo. Upon her retirement, her arthritis became worse and worse very quickly. She was a bedridden invalid. She continued to write the families and the girls and the women that she had ministered to. She called them her children back in Africa, until her death. And the Lord called her home on November 26, 1943. The Baptist Missionary Society of Great Britain passed the following resolution in her memory. Part of it reads this: she loved the African people with a deep and passionate devotion, and she longed with her whole life that they might be brought to Christ. To that end, she gave selfless service to her master, to the Africans, and to the mission. And I want to thank the Lord, and really this story should motivate us in our service of the Lord. And just a wonderful story about, it seems like a lady who had everything against her, but she insisted on serving the Lord and honoring the call that God had given her. And the work that she did is just nothing less of heroic when you read her life story. So I would encourage you to read her story someday. Lydia Dehailes, wonderful Baptist lady missionary that we want to honor this morning.